Welcome to Decision Point. Corrie Ten Boom was a Holocaust survivor, and her story is told in the book and the movie called The Hiding Place. Our guest today, Evelyn Hinds, brings the iconic Corrie Ten Boom to life for audiences all over the world. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's good to have you here, Evelyn. What is it about Corrie Ten Boom? What's so special about her that you would basically dedicate your life and ministry to recreating her story?
Well, she has a fascinating story, but I think I was first drawn to her for her faith and her strength. And then as I learned more about her, she became really like a spiritual grandmother to me through her books.
Through her books. So you never actually met her?
No, I did not.
But you have heard many audio recordings of her and
Yes.
interviewed her relatives and that kind of thing, is that right?
I have been 25 years now interviewing people who knew her and people who've seen her speak and people who worked with her, and many audio tapes and some recorded videotape, and it's just a wealth of information.
So there is a lot of information out there because
Yes.
she did a lot of speaking. So people may not know the story of Corrie Ten Boom and why she's such an extraordinary person. Can you briefly summarize her story for us?
Yes, she was a Dutch woman. Her family was a devout Christian family, and in World War II they decided to help the Jewish people. And they ended up in a concentration camp, and Corrie was the only member of her family that survived. She spent the rest of her life, when she got out of the camp, traveling around the world telling her story. Now that's amazing enough anyway, but in 1975, Billy Graham organization made the movie The Hiding Place. And she had begun writing books prior to that.
That was probably what really catapulted her to a high level of fame. I mean, her book has many millions of copies sold. It's a classic, but the movie always reaches a broader audience. And so what was it that was so extraordinary about Corrie Ten Boom's witness to the world? What was unique about her versus other Holocaust survivors?
Well, I would think that it would be her faith. And I know when I first saw The Hiding Place, which was the first time I'd ever heard of Corrie Ten Boom, and that was, I didn't see that until after 1983, and that was the year she died. And I saw the real Corrie Ten Boom came on at the end of the movie, and she had peace and joy in her face. And I thought, that woman knows something about living the Christian life that I need to know. So I was very drawn to her for that. She was a very powerful storyteller. She was very entertaining, had a wonderful sense of humor. And she was just a powerful force, really. And her story was adventurous of all the things that they did, hiding the Jewish people. And I mean, it's just compelling on a lot of different levels.
A lot of levels, yeah, and so there's a lot of material to work with. Now, there's one particular story that we're going to show the clip of that you reenact called The Guard, and what is the central message of that little piece that you do there called The Guard?
I think the fact that Corrie was able to forgive the guard is what really hits most people, because as human beings that is so difficult, and we all have our issues with people that we can't forgive. So I think that one sticks in the mind of people. Sort
of forgiving the unforgivable, because this was a Holocaust camp guard who was particularly brutal.
Yes.
And, so let's break for a minute and go to the clip of Evelyn reenacting Corrie Ten Boom and The Guard.
Oh, I never want to go back to Germany. But the Germans are not my enemies. I said I will go. And I have gone back to Germany, And there was many people hurting after the war and much work for me to do. I remember the time I was in Berlin, and there came a man to me, and he said, I have asked God to forgive me for what I have done. And I saw that man's face. It was a very familiar face to me. He was one of the cruelest guards at Ravensbrück. And those guards beat us, and they have beaten my Betsy until she became deaf in her ear because she was too weak to work. There was hatred in my heart. But that man said he asked God to forgive him, and then he said, I have asked God if I could ask for forgiveness from one of my very victims. And he said, Fräulein Ten Boom, I read in the paper you would be here, and I've come to say to you, will you forgive me? There was hatred in my heart. But I know Romans 5:5, and that tells us that already we have some experience of the love of God shed abroad in our heart. And so I said, God, give me that love that I may forgive this man. And exactly at that moment, it was like electricity that come through my arm, and I was able to take that man's hand and say, brother, I forgive you everything. Is that Corrie Ten Boom love? No, that is God's love. It reminds me of that poem of John Bunyan. It say, run, John, run, the law commands, but gives you neither feet nor hands. Far better news the gospel brings. It bids you fly, but gives you wings. Isn't that good? He gives you the love he demands of you.
So what was it like for you to create that clip or to create that scenario? Because you write all your own dramas and everything, and so you had to somehow come up with what exactly you were going to say and how you were going to act and so forth.
Well, that was fairly easy for me. Actually, I have written the script that I use, but it's kind of a cut and paste, so to speak, of her words. And she had her own endearing way of telling the stories that she told. And so I want to tell them the same way that she did, using her language. And she was a very intelligent woman, but her English wasn't perfect. But I think that's why we loved her so much. And so I try to use exactly her wording.
And you, in terms of studying her voice tone and her mannerisms and everything, you've tried to capture all of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
To allow people to feel like they met her.
Now, what has been people's reaction who knew her and have seen your work?
Well, the most reaction that I got when I first started doing this was people said there wasn't a dry eye at our table. And so I think it touches your heart when you are, you get in there with Corrie and imagine being there yourself and doing what she did and enduring what she did. And your heart is touched.
Yeah, because she definitely suffered a lot. Do you think there was that particular point was where it brought forgiveness to her mind consciously, or that she had already forgiven him and all the other people involved in the concentration camps beforehand? Does she talk about that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. It was Betsy, her sister, who was also in the camp, who died in the camp, that would tell her, Corrie, we have to forgive. We have to forgive. And so I think that was a struggle that she always had. And when that guard came to her, and she said, I had hatred in my heart. But she knew the answer to that hatred, and that was the Word of God.
Right. Now, that's something that a lot of people struggle with, that whole unforgiveness thing.
Yes.
And she said, I had hatred in my heart. But even though she had that hatred, when the request was made, she extended the forgiveness. Does that mean at that moment that her heart was transformed, or that it was still a struggle? I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, she said she made the decision, but as her arm went out, she felt the Holy Spirit really giving
Touching
her the power to
Right.
do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way it is. God expects us to begin,
Right.
and then we get the strength
Right.
in our beginning.
Right. So a lot of people think, well, I have to feel a certain way. But in her case, it was an act of obedience to the Word of
Right.
God, and then the feelings and the transformation
Right.
followed, right?
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So what kind of an impact did she have on people when they met her personally? And you've also interviewed a lot of people who have met her and interacted with her personally. What kind of a person was she?
Well, they said she liked to be the center of attention. I mean, and she was a very powerful person.
Gregarious, probably.
And
yeah.
I heard one woman say, when Corrie walked across the stage knew it had been walked upon. She was a very forceful, definite, a powerful woman, even in her old age.
Right, yeah. And so when people would interact with her on a one-on-one level, what was she like then? How was she with people individually?
Well, I would say she was very much a people person, and she was a very powerful, driven kind of person that we're going to do this many things today. She liked to get things done.
She was a driver.
A driver,
Yeah,
yes.
right. Well, that gives me some consolation, because I'm kind of like that, and I often feel guilty about it. So,
Yeah.
So what do you think? Did she have kind of the same message that she communicated over and over again, or did she adapt different messages for different audiences? How did that work when she would speak?
Essentially, she was giving biblical messages. Sometimes she talked on love, and sometimes she talked on prayer, and it would be different messages. But her life fueled the stories of those messages.
Right.
So she did speak about her life, but she wouldn't have done exactly what I'm doing, in that she is telling that entire story kind of at one time.
Sure.
Because basically her goal was to tell biblical truths,
Right.
and just illustrate them with stories from her life.
What were some of the favorite stories that she liked to tell over and over again, that she would tell frequently?
Can I
Sure.
do my
do your
okay.
thing there?
Well,
Okay.
this is well documented that she would carry in her suitcase purple cloth, and it had this weaving on it, and she could use this and communicate even with children.
Oh, sure.
And when they were in the camp, Betsy, her sister, said, "Corrie, this is like, our lives are like the backside of an embroidery. It's just a tangle of threads, but the other side is God's side, and it's beautiful." Well, Corrie wrote about that, that was what Betsy said to her prior to Betsy's death. And then I think when she came to the United States, she found a poem that sort of illustrated that. So if you imagine that I'm in my costume, I will do her signature story here. My life is like a weaving between my God and me. I do not choose the colors. He worketh steadily. Sometimes he weaveth sorrow. And I, in foolish pride, forget he sees the upper, but I the underside. Not till the loom is silent and the shuttles cease to fly Will God unroll the canvas and explain the reason why the dark threads are as needful in the skillful weaver's hands as those threads of gold and silver in the pattern he has planned? God has no problems with our lives, only plans. And I see that so much in my life. So that was Corrie, that she trusted God in all the heartache and suffering that she had to go through, that God was working a beautiful pattern for good in her life.
And that, yeah, that's really a beautiful analogy, and you do that so well. What was her time like in the concentration camps? Well, I mean, how long was she there, first of all? I don't recall. Was it several years?
She was actually imprisoned 10 months.
Okay.
But it was beyond comprehension, actually, yeah, of what she went through. She said she said the lack of hygiene was one of our greatest sufferings. Mm-hmm. If we got a chance for a shower, we don't know, from that spigot, does it come water or does it come gas? Mm. At such a moment, you face death in the eye. Mm. And we can't imagine what they endured there.
Yeah, it really is hard to imagine. As many of the movies and documentaries and everything that you've seen, it is incredible. So she was in one of the worst camps and experienced the worst conditions, and I think one of the things that was most heartbreaking to her was that she watched her sister die, who was a very frail person.
Yes.
But she was also a very godly woman as well.
Yeah.
One of the things that she did after she was released from camp and the war was over is that she moved to Orange County or Los Angeles and set up a household there. And a lot of people don't realize that she had a very large part of her life in the United States and was a resident here. So what kinds of things did she do when she was in California, and what brought her there? You know?
Well, Brother Andrew, her friend, a Dutch man, had a couple that lived in California, and he asked them to help her in ministry. They had helped him, and so she went out there, and they helped get her set up in a place to live. She was very popular with the preachers, and Chuck Smith loved her, and Chuck Swindoll, and I mean, a lot of preachers quote Corrie Ten Boom.
Sure.
She was a very popular speaker, traveled around, and at the very end of her life, she did have strokes, and she did pass away there in 1983, and she's buried there
in Los Angeles. Now, she was a real innovator. She was ahead of her time, I think, in terms of her vigor to get out her message in every way possible. So how did she participate in that? What did she do to get out that message?
She was a bold person, a bold woman. And, you know, when I first was getting to know her in her writings, and I was thinking, you know, traveling is hard. How do you, when you're old, you get up and you know, she called herself the tramp for the Lord, and she traveled all over the world. I thought, how did she do that? But then I thought, when you have survived a concentration camp, what's going to scare you?
Right.
I mean, her first trip out of Holland was on a freighter, because that was all that was available, with a crew of men. You know, I mean, that had to take some nerve, but sure, after what she had been through, really, I mean, what did she have to lose? You know, Betsy was dead, her father was dead, her nephew was dead, her sister did come out of the camp, but her brother got ill and died of the sickness that he got in the camp. So she had nothing holding her there in Holland. And she came first to America, and from there she traveled around the world. And I think that just realizing your time is short, people need to know the message, and she was on the job.
Yeah, right. Now, she was even involved in making the movie The Hiding Place, right?
She did have input in that. Professional writers, the Sherrills, wrote the book The Hiding Place. I didn't, you know, most people know The Hiding Place, but Corrie has, you know, nearly 20 books. She started writing her own books before there, but they're rather simple, told in her language.
So
her simple
in
English.
Or no, in English. Okay.
She also wrote in Dutch.
Oh, okay.
The very first book she wrote was called A Prisoner and Yet. A Prisoner and Yet. And she wrote to tell the story, and she wrote that in Dutch, and it was published soon after she got out of the concentration camp. And I actually got to see a hardback copy of that when I was in Holland, and I was like, wow, how did she get that done? You know, she wasn't a woman of influence or money or, you know, and but people were interested in what happened to the people that went to the camps.
Right. Yeah. Well, that is interesting. I've read some of her books, but I didn't realize there were that many books that she had written, and she was never married.
No, she wasn't, and she was totally focused on the Lord's work.
So it was her choice, or what did she say about that?
Well, actually, when she was young, she did have a young man that she was very interested in, and she thought he was also interested in her, and it didn't work out. But I think she then took that as the Lord wants to use me by myself, and I think she was okay with that.
Yeah. You know, I find that a lot of very powerful women who the Lord uses, you know, so many of them that we can think of, in order to really be fully committed, they have to remain single, because that call to marriage and family has to become preeminent once that happens. So. Now, you mentioned the final years, the silent years, there's a very powerful book out about her last 5 years. What happened the last 5 years of her life? And I think it was a continuing testament to who she was as a woman.
Well, they found out that she had this heart trouble, and they wanted to give her a pacemaker. And the doctors explained that she wouldn't survive if she didn't have this pacemaker. And she said, well, let me pray about that. You know, it wasn't like, oh, well, of course, give it to me.
Yeah.
No, she said, let me pray about this. And then she decided that it would be the Lord's will for her to continue. So she got the pacemaker, but then she had a series of strokes that incapacitated her, and then eventually that she couldn't talk, but she could sing.
Oh no, she could sing?
She could still sing, and she sang in Dutch.
Oh, wow.
I think that's a sweet memory.
That's beautiful. Yeah. What now you've talked to the young woman and met the young woman who the woman was young at the time when she wrote the book, who was her caregiver, Pam, and what has she said about her experience with Corrie at that time?
Well, I think it was probably very difficult, but it profoundly changed her life, watching those declining years.
What did she say that she was like during that time?
I imagine that Corrie was, you know, still wanting to get some work done and all that, but fairly patient with the situation she was in.
So very much at peace, even though.
Yeah.
But that had to be incredibly frustrating, because she was a woman who liked to do things, and to not be able to do had to be very frustrating. What are some of the least known stories about Corrie that people are often surprised to hear?
Well, I would like to just, one that I tell, and I love this story. It's Corrie said she had a group of young men and women, and a few men and women, but young people, teenagers, that helped her in the underground work. And she said, one day we heard there was 100 Jewish babies in an orphanage in Amsterdam, and they was to be killed. And so I had my teenager boys, they stole those babies. You may ask, how is that possible? I will tell you a secret. Sometimes there will come to the Baye a good German soldier who would say, I don't want to work any longer for Adolf Hitler. Can you help me? And I would say, sure, I can help you. And I would take him in and give him civil clothing. And I kept the uniforms. Now, I have not to go into details how those uniforms would help my teenager boys steal 100 babies.
Wow.
So that I love that story
That's a great
because
story.
she really was helping even those Germans
Sure.
to escape Hitler.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
If we just have a few minutes remaining, but if Corrie were alive today, what would she be concerned about?
I'm sure Israel. And the lukewarmness of our faith, that we need to be strong in a fervent, stirred up church. And also what's going on in Israel.
Yeah.
I think that would be it.
She was a big fan of Israel and very committed,
Yes.
but it's interesting that she never immigrated there.
She is a righteous Gentile, and she went there in 1968 and had a tree planted. She helped plant the tree at Yad Vashem in her honor. And sometime in the 80s, there was a thunderstorm in that garden, and one tree was struck by lightning and killed. And it was Corrie's tree, and it happened on her birthday.
Oh, interesting.
But it's replanted, but the story is told because her tree isn't the same size as the other trees in the garden of the righteous Gentiles. Yeah. But yeah, I think she had a great love of Israel.
Right. Well, it's been such a pleasure having you, and we will surely have you back again. It's been a joy to hear your representations of Corrie Ten Boom. Thank you, Evelyn. Okay.
Thank you.
So, have you been touched by the life of Corrie Ten Boom? Perhaps the message of forgiveness or the redeeming suffering through Christ is something that you need to hear. Let us know what you think on Facebook, Twitter, or our website at ksce.com/decisionpoint. Thank you.